Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix and talking about the systems it really is, as opposed to how it's been projected into your minds through very, very clever techniques to make you think it really is. But you always find the past controls the future, because those in charge of the past always control the future. They plan the future, you see, including how the public will accept things down the road, and how they'll give you campaigns on propaganda, for instance, and how it will work, and how they can prepare your minds before anything starts at all. So, very old techniques, and lots of scientists involved working with governments and think tanks, always, of course, on every aspect of society. But I go back to the PNAC group, the Project for a New American Century, and that was came out, of course, into the open with George Bush Jr. and his pals that wanted all to go to war across the entire Middle East. And we forget too that after the 9/11 incident, they first blamed Osama bin Laden in a cave somewhere in Afghanistan, and the US and the rest of the countries went into Afghanistan. They already had massed on the border to attack it and months before anything happened in 9/11, by the way. So it was on the cards, they're going in anyway. And they needed the incident to give them a rational explanation to go in. And most folk forget about that too. But anyway, the PNAC group, or Project for New American Century, had a lot in common with Israel. Many of them have dual citizenships, and so on and so on. That's what they call them, neocons, neoconservatives. They used to call themselves a type of a liberal, the group, in fact, but they didn't compete too well with the other liberal groups that were out there, so they changed their name. And after, of course, George Bush was out, they still have another group which they formed for the left-wingers to continue the same agenda, called the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, run by the same bunch, by the way. And they manage Obama. And that's why I keep saying you get the same agenda going through the changes in the House or parties. It doesn't matter. And as Jefferson said, when you see that happening, when the same agendas go through with the changes in the parties or the houses, he called it at the time, he said, no, they're under tyranny. And you truly are. Anyway, the PNAC group put out in the year 2000, Rebuilding America's Defenses, a strategy, forces and resources for a new century, it was called. It's a PDF, and I'll put it up tonight for those who want to wade through it, because I laid a lot of this stuff on the line, and a lot of propaganda in there too, which is rather transparent for those who are used to understanding propaganda techniques. I'll put it up tonight for those that want to read it. But what I'll do in the meantime is read a summary of it, a condensed version. And it says, Rebuilding America's Defenses, a summary blueprint of the PNAC plan for U.S. global hegemony, as it was called. And it says here that when the Bush administration started lobbying for war with Iraq, remember too, they started with Afghanistan and they changed their sights to Iraq. And they even got the media to go on board to try and say that Iraq had been behind 9/11, even though they hadn't been. And that came out during the inquiry later on. And Bush himself said, no, I never said that Saddam had anything to do with 9/11. He's just a bad man, and the world's better off without him. So he can do that with anybody he wants, basically. And that caused thousands and up to millions of deaths, actually. After all, they starved half of the population with embargoes, before they actually invaded and slaughtered them. Anyway, it says here that the Bush administration started lobbying for war with Iraq, and they used as rationale a definition of preemption, generally meaning anticipatory use of force in the face of an imminent attack. That was an Israeli concept which goes back to the Bible. If you suspect someone may down the road attack you for something, because maybe perhaps, for instance, you do something they won't like, they might attack you, then what did you do is you have a preemptive, you take them out first. And the US copied that strategy. Lots was written at the time that why is America taking Israelis' policies and techniques, and of course it got nowhere because you're all under the same influence. Anyway, it says here, generally meaning anticipated use of force in the face of an imminent attack, that was broadened to allow for the waging of a preventative war. So you slaughter people first in order to have a preventative war, including killing off the children, because the children, according to Israel, end up being rather angry, seeing everything slaughtered off and their whole infrastructure smashed to pieces, and they might fight down the road. So Israel is used to doing this kind of thing. And that was on the papers back at the time, by the way, if you get the old Israeli newspapers. And that became America's policy too. And And it says here, they were also able to convince much of the American public that Saddam Hussein had something to do with the attack of 9/11, despite the fact that no evidence of a link had been uncovered. Consequently, many people supported the war on the basis of, 1, a policy that has no legal basis in international law, and 2, a totally unfounded claim of Iraqi guilt. As I say, that came out during an inquiry that had nothing to do with 9/11. And they even did a poll in Canada, because Canadians knew that had nothing to do with it. But within a year, the poll said the media in the US had carefully, through little bits and pieces they put out there, over a year they could convince Americans subconsciously that Iraq had always been behind 9/11. Just like, again, 1984. Who are you fighting today? East Asia, West Asia? Oh, it's West Asia. It's always been West Asia. Orwell understood this stuff very well. He says, what most people do not know, however, is that certain high-ranking officials in the Bush administration had been working for a regime change in Iraq for the past decade, long before terrorism became an important issue for the country. In 1997, they formed an organization called the Project for the New American Century, or PNAC. They sought the establishment of much stronger U.S. presence throughout the Middle East and Iraq. Saddam Hussein had been their number one target for regime change. Members of this group drafted and successfully passed through Congress the Iraqi Liberation Act. A beautiful name, isn't it? I mean, there's psychological warfare right there. Iraqi Liberation Act. So they were going to invade, and actually said that, the PNAC group, they were going to spread democracy across the world by forcing it on them. So in other words, we're going to war and conquering them. The Iraqi Liberation Act, giving legal sanctions for an invasion of the country, and funneled millions of taxpayer dollars to Hussein opposition groups called the Iraqi National Congress and the Committee for the Liberation of Iraq. Now, since then, they've done the same thing, the same group, regardless of party, it's the same group behind it. And forget your front men. The guys who are behind the front men are far more important. They're continuous through parties. But as I say, they've done the same thing, exactly that. They've had to spread democracy, as I say, through Libya. That's been flattened, and they certainly have smashed Iraq to pieces. They bombed all of its infrastructure to pieces. It'll never ever have a first world status again. And they want to do the same now with Syria too. And that's the same agenda, as I say, that Israel published in its own papers at the time. Anyway, the PNAC philosophy was formed in response to the ending of the Cold War hostilities with Russia and the emergence of America as the world's only preeminent superpower, claiming that this is a strategic moment that should not be squandered. Members of the PNAC say that Americans should use this position to advance its power and interests into all areas of the globe. And they're talking about financial interests with big corporations. They believe the time is ripe for establishing democracies. Democracy means the same systems, they say, with the top private central banks being placed in, getting the countries into debt, getting the IMF to run the countries and the debts for the World Bank and the BIS, Bank for International Settlements, and so on, and running the world properly by the ones who should run the world, which is the richest folk on the planet. So, the PNAC members in the Bush team included Vice President Dick Cheney and his top National Security Assistant, I. Lewis Libby, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz, National Security Council member Elliot Abrams, Under Secretary for Arms Control and International Security John Bolton, and former Chairman of the Defense Policy Board Richard Perle. Other PNAC members exercising influence on U.S. policy are the President of the Committee for the Liberation of Iraq, Randy Scheunerman, and Republican Party leader Bruce Jackson, and current PNAC Chairman William Kristol, Conservative writer for the Weekly Standard Jeb Bush, and President's brother and Governor of Florida is also a member. Back with more after this. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix, talking about the PNAC group, which is still running this system. They're on the left wing too, of course, under Freedom for the Defense of Democracies, which has forced democracies through slaughtering folk and forcing it on them. Anyway, it says here that The campaign to overthrow Hussein was unsuccessful during the Clinton presidency and early days of Bush term, but on 9/11 they found the event they needed to push for the overthrow of Hussein. Within 24 hours, both Wolfowitz and Cheney were calling for an invasion of Iraq, even before anyone knew who had been responsible for the attacks. Well, they all knew themselves. It was an inside job. Individuals who now belong to the PNAC have been influencing White House policy since the Reagan era, calling for coups in Central America and claiming that a nuclear war with Russia could be winnable. That was the MAD, Mad Mutually Assured Destruction. Richard Perle is one of their most prominent spokesmen. He and Michael Ledeen of the American Enterprise Institute is currently lobbying for a war with Syria and Iran. This is in 2000. Have adopted a stance that they call total war, the ability to wage multiple simultaneously war around the globe to achieve American ends. It's not American at all. Recently, Perle commented on America's war on terrorism. No stages, he said. This is total war. We're fighting a variety of enemies. There are lots of them out there. All this talk about first we're going to do Afghanistan, then we'll do Iraq. This is entirely the wrong way to go about it. If we just let our vision of the world go forth, and we embrace it entirely, and we don't try to piece together clever diplomacy, but just wage a total war, our children will sing great songs about us years from now. I wonder what country he was talking about. Members of the PNAC are so self-assured that they're advancing America's best interests, and that they publish policy papers specifically outlining their plans that many fear may be laying the groundwork for a third world war. Their ideas are peculiarly atavistic, considering the friendly ties that have been forged between most of the major nations during the past 10 years. The central policy document is entitled Rebuilding America's Defenses, RAD, published in their website at I'll give you the website too, I'll put that up tonight. And it outlines a plan for American hegemony in the coming years, pinpointing problem areas of the world and suggesting regime change of unfavorable governments so that eventually the whole world will be unified under the banner of American democracy. It's funny that America's supposed to be a republic too, isn't it? But everybody's forgotten about that. And it says, already we're seeing evidence of PNAC influence on U.S. foreign policy. For instance, the concept of homeland defense comes straight from RAD. Iran, Iraq, and North Korea, nations that George Bush calls the axis of evil, are listed together in RAD several times as possible military threats to the U.S. There's a suggestion that the military spending be increased to 3.8% of the GDP, exactly the amount over and above present expenses for the Iraqi campaigns. It says, but the proposal for the next year's budget, its basic statement of policies, bespeaks and advocates the very essence of the idea of preemptive engagement. It's more across the whole world under any pretext. Bush's National Security Strategy of September 20, 2002 adopted PNAC ideas and emphasized a broadened definition of preemption. Since we have already hearing accusations against regimes in Iran and Syria, will they be slated for invasion? The document is written with all of the single-mindedness, unilateralism, and inattention to international ramifications, with either friend or foe, that the Bush administration displayed in its current build-up for war with Iraq. There is even assertion of the necessity of American political leadership overriding that of the United Nations, a policy that was sadly played out when the U.S. invaded Iraq without the approval of either the UN or the international community. Then it goes on about rebuilding America's defenses. And this is, I believe, that rebuilding America's defense is a must-read for anyone concerned about the future of our planet. Since the document is over 80 pages long, I created a summary of its major ideas in order to make it more accessible. And it goes through Pax Americana, outlining the rationale for global empire. I'm not kidding, folks. This is from the President's Group. Securing global hegemony, pinpointing regions that are considered trouble spots for U.S. policy, and rebuilding the military. Plans for expansion, that's what it was, the drones and that, they're all thought about them long before. Plans for expansion of the US military might, and the future wars of Pax Americana, the RAD vision of complete control of land, sea, airspace, and cyberspace. And they've got Total Information Network too. This is against all its own citizens, remember. As much as possible, I've used direct quotations followed by page numbers so the reader can consult original. My personal comments are in italics. And it gives you all the further reading about PNAC and gives you lots of good articles from PNAC to read that make sense of what's happening today. And it's quite fascinating to see something written out of total tyranny, basically, by megalomaniacs, even before they had done a lot of it, because most, madmen in the past, just take it as it comes along, as expand their empire. These guys actually wrote about it in advance. But the strange thing was it tallied completely with that of Israel's countries that they wanted the US to take out all around the Middle East. And so we're on the same agenda, as I've mentioned before. So I'll put up the PDF from the PNAC group itself and this other group's